Hello and welcome to R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, Editor-in-Chief, and today we are tackling the ins and outs of disinfectants. And my very special guest has become a great friend and mentor of mine, so I'm very happy to have Clay Hernandez on with me today. He is the National Director of Technical Sales and Training at Artemis Biosolutions. He applies his 20 plus years of restoration and remediation experience to product strategy, training, and protocol development. He's led a large-scale field operation, including pandemic response at Signal Restoration, and held leadership roles at EcoShield, Innovative Decon, and Service Master. Clay holds multiple industry certifications, including mold assessment, trauma scene recovery, and HAZWOPER. He also consults with Element Building Sciences on environmental testing and indoor air quality. He also sits on their medical advisory board for proper decontamination protocols. Please welcome Clay.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Yes, welcome. Finally, I think this one's been long overdue. We get to chat quite often at the trade shows, and we share a lot of common, interests and ideas. And, when I saw that we had disinfectant as a topic, I was like, I need to reach out to Clay and the team and see where we can just kind of talk about disinfectants as a whole and maybe even uncover some misconceptions. I think we've met previously and we've talked about, what people think they know or what they don't know, or maybe they think they need to have a ton of arsenals in their toolbox, but that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to meet you at several of the different trade shows in the last couple of years, and I welcome the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. And I know that there's so much to cover. I've personally been able to use your guys' products, and it's been amazing. And it opens some ideas in my mind about, where people may think they know things or don't know things, like I mentioned a second ago, but also, how how can their products in their toolbox cover a variety of scenarios without having an abundance of products. So I wanted to really dive in and talk about what are some of the key factors to consider when selecting the right disinfectant for a specific surface or material or even project.
One of the things that I find very frustrating in the industry, and a lot of people just don't know how to read an EPA label. So they don't know what product to use against what organisms or what contaminants. And that makes it extremely difficult, especially the lower down the food chain you go, so to speak, with the technicians that are actually in the field doing the work and how little they know about actually reading an EPA label and the claims that are made, the dwell times that are in there for the different organisms. Most of them just are told, go spray this, and they go and they spray it and they assume that it's working because that's what they were told to do. But if you really dig down into the EPA claim language, and it'll specify against these organisms, you have this amount of dwell time. You got to clean first. There's a lot of steps that you have to follow on an EPA label. And a lot of people, majority of people, have no idea how to read that label and how to use the products that the label represents.
Well, I think that's why that label is on it, right? It just like with the common thing that you use for cooking. There's ingredients and there's proper instructions on there that you should utilize. If we take that mentality and apply it to what we're doing when we're utilizing disinfectants, it should make sense, right? There's a label on there for a reason to tell you to do what and why and how long. You're supposed to do it that way. And I think, unfortunately, to your point, people do what they're told instead of really understanding what that label means.
Yeah,
That's
I
perfect.
spend a lot of time in the field working with technicians, and when I interact with them, you get a sense of what they know, what they don't know, and it's disheartening how little they know about what they're doing. They just know apply a product, but they don't understand dwell time. They don't understand contact. They don't understand cleaning a surface and removing the bio load before you can disinfect. They think it's all one process. I just spray my rag or spray a surface and wipe it, and I've done my job. And that's just not the case depending on what they're up against.
Well, I think too, one of the biggest things is load reduction, right? How many times have you seen or heard people not utilizing the method of load reduction prior to utilizing their disinfectant? I think that's one thing that, you talk about a lot, if I'm not mistaken. Just, it's you have to pre-treat before you treat, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I like analogies, and then we spoke the other day, and I was describing to you, and my family comes from the restaurant business about a three compartment sink. Every restaurant has one, every bar has one behind the bar, and there's three compartments for a reason. There's a wash, there's a rinse, and there's a sanitize. And if you take a dirty glass or a dirty dish and put it right into the sanitizer, it's not going to be sanitized. You have to wash it off, wash the bio load, the food that's on there off, then you rinse it, and then you sanitize it. And that applies to everything in the disinfecting world.
Exactly, exactly. And I think, you and I have both trained under Jeff Jones, and one thing he said is, what are we decontaminating and why? Or what are we cleaning and why, right? And so I think that also is often forgot as well, not just the three compartment sink, but why are we doing this? And what is it that we're actually tackling? That is part of a problem too, if I'm not mistaken. You see it more than I do, but just learning those techniques and just that mindset is not something that you hear about all the time. So, do you see that being a problem? What are we treating and why, or what are we decontaminating and why?
Sure. I mean, a perfect example, and I've done a few of them in the last few months, is floods. And you're going into a structure that has been contaminated with God knows what. I mean, it's not just a mold, it's bacteria, it's viruses, it's pesticides, herbicides, gasoline. My own house flooded after Hurricane Helene, and I came in and I didn't do any actual testing, but I can imagine what went through my house because my shed out back has a lawnmower, has a pressure washer, gasoline engines, oils, gasoline, all in my house, totally. And, those are all carcinogen based products that mixed into the soup. So to go in there and just think that you're cleaning a moldy surface or sewage water, you're the point to that you need to get to before you can disinfect the remaining structural members is enormous. You have a lot of bio load in there, and you need products that are capable of reducing that bio load so you can disinfect. And we spoke about this as well the other day. I like to think of the analogy of trying to wax a dirty car. You can see dirt on a car, so you know you need to wash it before you can wax it. So imagine wax is a disinfectant. But the problem that we have is visually you cannot see contamination on surfaces because they're microscopic. But if there's a load there and you don't clean it, the active ingredients in your disinfectant are going to be used to use all their energy just on the bio load and not doing the actual disinfecting. And that's what's critical. And you need products that just can do the cleaning and do the reduction, like Jeff Jones speaks about a lot in his classes, before you can do any actual disinfecting.
Yeah, and that brings me kind of to like the next question that I had, and it's, can you walk us through the proper steps of applying disinfectants like efficiently and effectively, not just applying, right? And what do people often overlook during that process? And I think one was load reduction that we talked about, but what else in that process is missed or maybe often forgotten or maybe not talked about as much in this industry?
It's surprising when you're in my line of work, and I had a couple of different surgeries last year that required physical therapy. So I'm interacting with the medical community. And to a person, every single one of them, when one person gets off of a bed that's got the vinyl cushion on it, they go and they spray it and wipe it down. Medical professionals don't even understand. They haven't done anything because they haven't allowed any dwell time. They spray a surface and wipe it down. And sometimes they're even wiping it down with a cloth rag, and they don't understand, depending on what the ingredients are in that disinfectant, they've just neutralized it with the cotton rag because they don't understand quat binding. That's why it's critical that you use synthetic materials like microfiber rags. No matter what product you're using, if it's got quats in it and you're using a cotton rag, you're destroying the chemical before it has a time to do anything. So people think spray and wipe is disinfecting, and that's totally against what the label says. If you're doing measles, you need to let it sit for 5 minutes. If you're doing this, you need to let it dwell for a certain amount of time, depending on the organisms. Or, and the EPA mandates this, every chemical disinfectant needs to work within 10 minutes. So it makes sense, just to be safe, no matter what you're doing and what your contaminant is, it should be remain wet for 10 minutes. And I have a training video that I do in my training that shows I did a sample in my office in Chicago, and I sprayed a surface and did a time lapse video. It was 40% humidity in there. Within 7 minutes, the chemical had disappeared. So that meant I didn't meet the EPA requirements for disinfecting that conference table because it disappeared. Legitimately, I should have gone back and reapplied the chemical to keep it wet for 10 minutes. So that's the most frequent thing I see is people don't understand that part of the disinfecting process is remain wet.
Well, I think to your point, to reapply, right? To meet that dwell time. I think some people might think like they can't reapply, but to your point, you said I should have gone and reapplied.
Correct. Correct. If you
Interesting.
see it visually like that, it's impactful. Oh, it disappeared because nobody's going back and double checking that gurney or that bed in the hospital that makes sure that it stayed wet for 10 minutes. They sprayed it and moved on.
Yeah, I was
I've
definitely going to say they're overturning things fast, right? It's fast.
I've worked with local hospitals here quite a bit in trying to, improve their processes. And I've been told by several larger the hospital, even it's even worse. They have 22 minutes to convert a room between patients. None
Wow.
of that includes 10-minute dwell time. They have 22 minutes to convert a bed in a 1,000-bed hospital here locally in Tampa. I assure you, those chemicals aren't sitting on those surfaces for 10 minutes.
I was going to say, are they even sitting there for five? I mean, probably not. Like you said, they're spraying and wiping immediately because of the time that they have to turn over a bed or a room,
Sure.
which, doesn't allow the dwell time. And I think that is one of the most important pieces to your point. Also as, preconditioning, right? I know a lot of people who don't precondition or have talked about, I didn't precondition prior before learning properly, right? And I not necessarily maybe in our industry, but in other industries like the medical field, right? They may not precondition. So why is preconditioning or cleaning the surface before applying the disinfectant so important? And what risks can arise if that step is skipped?
Well, again, the disinfectant needs to work on a clean surface. The active ingredients in any disinfectant are neutralized by any biological load that is there, so it doesn't get to the surface to do actually disinfect the surface. That's what's critical. But again, we go back to if we can't see it, it must be clean, and that's not necessarily the case. You have to precondition it so that it's clean before. And this is another misconception is that there's a lot of products out there that says it's a one-step process. It cleans and disinfects, but that's two steps. They think it's cleaning and disinfecting in the same motion, and that's not the case. You can clean with this product because it has active ingredients, surfactants, and those types of things that'll help remove and reduce the bioload and precondition it for disinfecting. But because you've done that first step, you haven't done the second step, which is the dwell time required for proper disinfection.
Yeah, and I think that's key too, right? Cleaning and disinfecting in the same sentence. That's two different acts, two different projects.
Two different processes altogether. You have one
Yeah.
that will do that, but you have to understand what you're doing and when to do it.
Well, I think that's a good point too, is understanding when and why and how things work, right? Not just one idea of cleaning and disinfecting works across the board. That can get people in trouble and also leave things behind. If I'm being quite honest, you haven't completed the task at hand. So speaking of all of this and process procedure is really big in all of this, but one thing I think there's a lot of misconceptions just in all lines of our work, but what and where do you see mistakes in the application of disinfectant? Are there particular surfaces or situations where these problems tend to occur? So I think we saw some stuff in COVID, right? That comes to my mind right away. I think a lot of times that comes to people's minds since that was like our pandemic. So yeah, where do you see those mistakes in disinfectant application and where do you tend to see those problems occur the most?
Something that's come along, and I'll say it's, 10, 15 years that it's been around, but people fog environments and they think fogging is disinfecting. And that's just not the case. It's all about wetting surfaces. And if you're fogging, you walk into a room and you have just fogged it very thoroughly, and there's a thick cloud of chemical in the air, you think that you've disinfected that area. But in fact, that's not the case. And the EPA very explicitly says wet surfaces. So yes, you can use a fogger, but you need to wet the surfaces, horizontal, vertical surfaces, and let them remain wet. And that's where I think a lot of people are mistaken that they go in and fog a room and thinking that that is the process, when in fact you should be applying the product to the walls and the fog is a byproduct of it as you're applying that product. But if you haven't wet the surfaces for the proper length of time, you haven't done it adequately. And what's the case in mold environment? They're testing. Somebody's coming behind you and doing air samples and surface samples for the, but the most part in the flood damage and flood restoration, they're not testing afterwards. It's just a visual inspection. Some companies do prefer to use an ATP meter, and at least you have some data to show that you cleaned the surface. But that's not going to account for any chemicals that are embedded in that building system. Two by fours with the gasoline, like we were talking about, and toluene, and all those carcinogenic materials, the ATP is not going to pick that up. So you have to trust your products that you're using that are effective against all of those contaminants. So
Yeah, and I
that's
would.
the biggest thing I see.
Okay, that's interesting too because you're talking about stuff beyond the drywall, right? That's the other thing is some of this stuff is beyond the drywall, but even the drywall, right? If it's not tested and it's by the looks, doesn't mean that there's not something there. Because most things that are dangerous you really can't see, if I'm being quite honest.
Sure. I mean, the large majority of our jobs or our projects in the restoration industry is 2 foot floor, 4 foot, 8 foot flood cut, floor to ceiling flood cuts. And you're removing all that and you're going back and you're trying to clean a semi-porous material, which is a 2 by 4 piece of wood or decking or plywood or siding. And those are extremely porous materials, but it's not practical to just demolish the whole building. So we do the best we can in the industry to clean, sanitize, and disinfect those surfaces that are remaining. And if it's doesn't, you just can't get the staining out, then we're encapsulating it. And everybody knows that process. But very few are coming back behind and testing for cleanliness, sanitation, disinfecting.
That's very true. And I would also say too, I know in the beginning we talked about, I mentioned some people feel like they have to have a product for everything, right? So sometimes that's 10 products, 20, 30, whatever the amount is. Can you kind of talk about understanding the products you have and not having to have, a separate product for each job, if you will, and understanding the importance and the power of the products you actually do have on hand. I think you guys offer a two-part and a three-part, which is very interesting, and it handles different scenarios. Can you kind of talk about that and understanding like, you don't have to have 1,500 products in your arsenal to do your job right.
A lot of that's just marketing. It's if you look at the ingredients, you look at the labels, there are a lot of the similar products, but they're marketed to flooring, they're marketed to the restaurant industry, they're botanical. So it's all about the EPA claim. What's it say on the claim and what's it capable of doing? I've been with Artemis going on 6 years now, but I've been using the products that they have for almost 20 years. And one of our taglines is many threats, one solution. And when you look at our label and you see what it was designed to do, it was actually developed for weapons of mass destruction. You don't clean chemical hazards when you go into an environment like a war zone that has chemical contamination. You don't have time to clean. That's what this product was created for. And that's what I look for in a product, something that's going to reduce the bio load so I can disinfect. And that's what's so unique about this product. One of the misconceptions that's out there is a lot of chlorine-based products. They don't stand up against a bio load at all. Once you put a chlorine-based, bleach-based product in a dirty environment, all the active ingredients are eaten up right away, and it's not doing any disinfecting. Another thing that you look for is what are the byproducts? Are you discoloring your fabrics? Or are you discoloring, ruining things that fine furniture, oil paintings? You got to look at, what you're using, where you're using it. Make sure, do no harm, I guess you could say, because a lot of chemicals that are out there are extremely aggressive, the acid-based products, and they'll damage the interiors of the places that you're trying to clean. So that's one of the reasons that we promote our products as far as a one solution for a lot of different problems, biological, chemical, heavy bio loads. The product's outstanding for that. And there's other products that are out there that do similar things, but to have 40 different chemicals in the back of your truck and not know, it says floor, I use it on floor. It says surface, I use it on surfaces. And again, we started the conversation by talking about the technicians don't know how to read an EPA label. They just said, use the blue stuff for this, use the orange
Mhm.
stuff for this. And that's what they're told to do, but they don't understand the science of what they're doing. And it's not their fault. It's just the industry that doesn't train these folks properly.
Yeah, and I would definitely say having 40 products in the back of your truck could lead to other problems. You could misuse a product, right? Especially if you're in a hurry. And then what does that do, right? What kind of compromising situation does that put your technician or even your company in?
Well, and that's really the case. There's a couple of problems with concentrated products. They're very cost effective. They reduce the cost of your, acquisition of cost of goods sold. But the problem is if 2 ounces to a gallon of water is good, then 4 ounces got to be twice as good. And that is not the case. You have to mix it as directed. Oh, I'm getting a little bit low on the job. I don't want to have to drive back. I'm just going to use an ounce of this in a gallon of water. Well, that then you're not doing proper following the EPA label properly. Another problem that's out there is depending on the water hardness. Hardness of water means it's got minerals in it. It's got magnesium, calcium. That's usually what comes out of groundwater that's in there. Those eat up the active ingredients in concentrated products. So you've added 2 shot glasses of a chemical to 126 ounces of hard water. And before you start using it, you've already deactivated all the active ingredients in that product or severely reduced it. And a lot of people don't understand what hard water does to the concentrated product. So they're not using them as they're labeled.
That's very interesting that you brought up the hard water, because that's different all over the United States too, right? You know, I mean, Florida, I don't know what your guys' water like is like, but in Nevada, we don't even drink our water out of the tap. We're very lucky that we even cook with it, but I can't imagine utilizing that for something in the field, if I'm being quite honest.
Yeah, and people don't understand hard water as far as spots on my shower glass door. There's spots all the time. That's their definition of hard water, but they just don't understand what that means to the end product that you're trying to disinfect with.
And I think you bring up some great points as far as like having multiple products and the technicians don't know. Let's face it, we're in a very busy industry and a lot of times training is not really an option on day one, if I'm being quite honest. Most times we need our technicians in the field and we're lucky if they get 2 or 3 days of consecutive training before, really diving in head first. And that it's just because of how in demand some of our services are, right? And so
Sure.
it makes it a little bit more complicated, but I will definitely say, even just taking the time to watch something like this, a podcast, or read an article, or share an article with your team can make the world of difference. They will remember something when they're out in the field, even if they haven't physically gone through it, because I think us talking about this is really key, because there are a lot of misconceptions about products or process, and what makes a product better than the other, right? There's all of these things that come down to disinfectant, and just anything that we do, if I'm being quite honest. There's, Joe over here says this, and Chuck over here says this, and
Right.
now I'm talking to Clay, and so it's gets very confusing. There's a lot of information in our industry, so that's why I felt like this is an opportunity to really talk about the importance of understanding your labels, understanding dwell time, understanding processes, but also really understanding you don't need 50 chemicals to do your everyday jobs, right?
Absolutely. Just complicating the situation for the low man on the totem pole. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about just think about the biological load in a toilet overflow.
Oh gosh,
And
I did not.
and think about what steps are they taking before they think that they're disinfecting? What cleaning, pre-cleaning, preconditioning, especially if, you know, all second story homes here in Florida are plywood decking. They're not concrete slabs. Every second floor is plywood decking. And you have an overflow toilet on the second floor and you got to clean that plywood decking. It's a totally different subject than cleaning the first floor, which is concrete slab. Little porous, but nothing compared to plywood decking. And are you testing that before you even disinfect? Are you doing an ATP swab? Yeah, I've got it down to 30 ROUs. Now I'm ready to disinfect. Nobody's doing that. They're just trusting the process, but they don't understand the process. They don't understand, is my chemical capable of going through all of that feces, that urine, that nasty stuff that's in that porous material, and then trying to disinfect it?
Well, and just this makes me think about the homeowner too, right? You get there after the homeowners probably tried to clean up themselves. Can you imagine how far that contamination actually goes outside of the bathroom?
Sure. Yeah. It's, and one of the things Jeff Jones teaches on his in his microbial warrior class is about how many steps away from an incident is the contamination on your feet. And you go into an overflow toilet and walk 29 steps in the other direction, and you've got feces on your shoe all the way into the little kid's bedroom that's crawling around on the floor. But you don't see it. It's microscopic. So you don't think of cleaning 3 bedrooms over because the incident is here. But the whole area needs to be treated because if you haven't tested it, you don't know. So you need to treat it like it has contamination in there.
Yeah, and to your point, a child on the floor, they're not only their hands and everything, kids put their hands in their mouth constantly, and so imagine that happening to your own child or somebody it's like,
Sure.
wow, it goes far beyond the instance that it happened in the bathroom.
Absolutely. Another good example, and this is why it spreads so much, and it's called the cruise ship virus, is norovirus, gastrointestinal virus. And when you get that, you got stuff coming out of everything in your body. And so that biological load in a 200 square foot cabin on a cruise ship all of a sudden gets cleaned, but not properly. And it spreads throughout. And that's why a couple of people with norovirus, all of a sudden you've got 500 people on that ship that have a gastrointestinal bug because of the bile load that hasn't been properly reduced before they cleaned. So it's when you start talking gastro, C. diff is another one. When you have anytime you're into an environment that has Clostridium difficile contamination, you need to be consulting with somebody that knows what they're doing in that contaminated environment. Extremely difficult to kill.
And I would definitely say, to your point about the neurovirus, that can happen so quickly, right? And that's no different for us if we were to go in and handle uh a project and we didn't do it properly, it could make people sick. I think that's the other thing is depending on what it is. I talked to Jeff recently about um a couple companies who went and did fentanyl jobs and they didn't do it properly, and the people that came in behind them actually died because the job wasn't done correctly.
It's serious
That's the
stuff.
kind of stuff that we're dealing with, right?
Yep, exactly. I've seen studies, particularly in norovirus, 1,000 organisms, viral particles on the head of a pen, a straight pen. It takes less than 20 to make you sick.
Wow.
So when you try to even imagine visualizing what does 17 out of a million look like on the head of a pen, and you're in charge of cleaning that area from somebody that's been sick with that virus.
That's a heavy responsibility and it's a very serious one too, right?
And that's why it's so contagious.
Exactly. I
Proper
think I've
cleaning, disinfecting.
Exactly. And I was just going to say, I think that we've covered so much today, and I look forward to having you on again because I know that there's going to be more to talk about in the future, and we haven't even dove really into scenarios as much, but I think maybe in the future that would definitely be an opportunity. But before we sign off, is there anything you wanted to add for those who have any questions, maybe about disinfectant, proper application, or anything like that?
Just appreciate what is on the EPA label. And if you don't understand, it's one thing to read it, it's another thing to comprehend what it says. I've seen EPA labels that are 50 and 60 pages long. There's only a couple of pages of information that actually apply to what you're doing. A lot of it's marketing stuff. You can say this about it. You can say this about it. But get to the part where it says, if you have this, you need to have this amount of dwell time. And then you can trust the process. But if you don't understand what your chemicals are capable of doing, then you don't understand the whole process.
Yeah, well said. And I would definitely say for maybe anybody who has questions about understanding EPA labels or the importance that they hold, Dr. Carrie Lesage did a piece on EPA labels because I think that is a gap that we have, if you will. I think sometimes we see it as an obstacle. Like you said, several pages, if not 50. And that can be a little intimidating, if you will.
I've had conversations with Dr. Lesage and Dr. Gavin McGregor Skinner, who's with the CDC, and they couldn't be in more agreement about we need to clean up. Well, we don't have the power to do that, but the EPA needs to clean up the bureaucracy that's in those labels because it's just what's the point if nobody's reading them, or if they're reading them but don't understand, don't comprehend what they're saying. But it's very
Yeah.
important that they do that, and I'm open to anybody that wants to reach out to me. contact Artemis, and I'm a phone call away from walking them through any scenario.
I will definitely say Clay and the entire team at Artemis are very pleasant. They're easy to get a hold of and they really know their stuff. So take Clay up on his, offer, reaching out to him. He'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. I'd love to thank you all for joining us today on Ask the Expert. We can't wait to see you on the next one. And as always, take care.